Hello and welcome. This is Andrew Plitt with andrewplitt.com, and in this video we are covering some more basics for Tai Chi training. Now you probably recognize these guys from the previous videos that I've done on the purpose of relaxation in Tai Chi, and they're going to be helping us a little bit again today while we talk about what you should be doing with your feet during Tai Chi training. Now active footwork in Tai Chi training is much better demonstrated with a live demo, not with pictures, so that's not really what we're going to be talking about in this video. Today we're going to be talking about weight distribution and where you should be focusing force from your upper body down through to your feet and how that should interact with the ground. I'm going to start by telling you where to direct your force, what should be going on with the feet. Then I'm going to talk about some exercises that you can do to help you refine your weight distribution on your feet as you train. We're going to discuss why it's important to have your weight correctly distributed on your feet. Then we're going to discuss some misconceptions about weight distribution on the feet that are very common in Tai Chi training. Let's go ahead and get started. So when you're practicing Tai Chi, where your weight is distributed on your feet really is going to affect everything up from there. So if your feet are not correctly used in your training, it's going to affect how your muscles tense, it's going to affect how stable your joints are, it's going to affect your body alignment and how you're able to direct force down to the ground or not, depending on how you're using your feet. And the feet are really the foundation of everything else that happens through the body. So if this part isn't right, then the rest of what's going on is not going to be right either. The feet are your connection with the ground. They're really where your root takes place. If you don't have a good weight distribution, you don't have a good connection to the ground with your feet, then you don't have a root. And a root is really important in Tai Chi training because if you think of like a tree, so we're going to say this guy here, instead of being a guy doing Tai Chi, he's a tree now. His point of contact with the ground is where his root system is able to take root. It's able to grow down into the ground and give him stability. So in a root system, you take up nourishment, but then also you anchor yourself to the ground. So if wind blows, the tree doesn't get blown over, its roots hold it solid. And this is very similar in Tai Chi training. If you don't have a solid root, a good connection to the ground, then it's going to be easy for you to get blown over or pushed over by someone when you're doing push hands, or even not have good balance when you're doing solo training. And so we really want to make sure our feet are doing what they're supposed to be doing to establish that root and to establish the stability we need while we're doing Tai Chi training. So the first thing we're going to talk about is where your weight should be distributed on your feet. And I need to clarify some terms here. I'm going to say weight distribution a lot. Really, your weight is evenly distributed over the bottoms of your feet, but it's centered at specific points on the foot. And you can test this out by putting your foot on the ground and keeping the whole foot in contact, but you can roll your weight out to the side so it's along the edge of the foot, the lateral edge of the foot, and even though the rest of the foot's still in contact with the ground, the edge of the foot is what's holding the majority of the weight. You can shift your weight forward so that your weight is really being predominantly carried by the front of the foot. The toes are gripping the ground, the ball of the foot. All of this is carrying the majority of the weight, and yet you still have the rest of the foot in contact with the ground. Same can be true of the heel. So you can focus your weight at different points on the foot, basically focus where your center of gravity is lining up, where the lines of force are coming down from your upper body through your legs to the ground, where that's being focused on the foot, even though the whole foot is in contact with the ground. So in this video, we are going to be discussing both weight distribution on the bottom of the foot, which parts of the foot are in contact with the ground. We're also going to be discussing the focal point of the force of your upper body coming down into the ground, or where the weight of your upper body is focused on the bottom of the foot. So the first thing that we should discuss is what parts of your foot are in contact with the ground. And the answer is pretty simple. Basically, you want even distribution of contact with the ground on the bottom of your foot. So you don't want the toes lifted up, you don't want the ball of the foot lifted up, you don't want the heel lifted up for the majority of your stance. So I guess I should clarify again here. We are talking about like stationary posture. So if we bring these guys back, we can see how they're standing. This is basically what we're talking about. When you're going through the form and your foot is in flat contact with the ground, how should it be in contact with the ground? What's the weight distribution? We aren't necessarily talking about specific foot postures that happen in different stances where maybe the heel is raised, or if you're pivoting and you raise the heel to pivot on the ball of the foot, or if you're pivoting on the heel and you raise the toes to pivot. At those times, there are very specific points where you kind of have to release contact with the ground with the rest of the foot and keep contact with only one point. But for right now, what we're talking about is when you're standing with your foot flat, how should the weight be distributed, and what are the contact points between your foot and the ground. So this is quite straightforward, and I'm sure all of you have seen footprints before, and really a footprint is a perfect diagram of what part of your foot should be in contact with the ground. So you basically want your whole foot to be in contact with the ground evenly all the way across the bottom of the foot. So the first thing you want to get down when you're doing your Tai Chi training, I'm going to use my hand as a foot and put it down on the table here. So when you step on the ground, you want to make sure that you are not lifting any part of your foot, either the edge in, the heel up, the toes up. You want your foot to come in flat contact with the ground. And imagine that the foot is basically like melting into the ground and basically becoming a part of the ground, spreading out and sinking into the ground when you're in contact with the ground with your foot. So as far as what's in contact with the ground, there's even weight distribution across all of the foot. Everything's in contact with the ground. And that's probably the simplest part of this discussion. So now let's discuss where you focus your weight from your upper body down into the ground, or where you're focusing the energy from the upper body, the force, either from gravity just pulling on you and you're going through a solo form, or from push hands practice. So we just said that you have your entire foot basically in contact with the ground. Your whole footprint is dispersing weight across the bottom of your foot. But at the same time, the weight of your body coming down onto the foot can be focused over different points of the foot, like we mentioned earlier. So even though the bottom of your foot is fully in contact with the ground and it's like stuck to the ground, you do want to center your weight over a specific part of your foot. And the part of your foot where you want to center your weight is directly below where the tibia attaches to the talus. So the talus is this bone in the foot that connects to your tibia, and the tibia is basically your shin bone. So that is the main weight-bearing force from your whole body coming down to the foot. It connects at this point right here. And where you want to direct any force coming from the body is you want to center that directly below this spot. So that force is coming down straight through here. Now if your leg's tilted back a bit, it's going to come straight down through here. If your leg is tilted forward a bit, it's going to come back a little bit more. But the idea is it's driving straight through this point, and you can use that connection point in the ankle as kind of your pivot as far as where you're directing your weight through your foot. Now this goes completely against what a lot of people have learned about where they want to center their weight on the foot. There's a spot on the foot called the Yongchuan point, or the bubbling well. It's an acupuncture point, and it's just slightly behind the ball of the foot, about here, and toward the midline of the foot. And this is also referred to as kidney 1 on the kidney meridian. And a lot of people are taught that that's where you want to focus your body's weight on your foot. So later on we're going to discuss what that point is and what its usefulness is in Tai Chi, and we're going to discuss why that's not where you want to center your weight. So we're not going to focus on that just yet, but that's coming up later in the video. But for right now, what we need to know is that the force of the upper body is centered directly below the tibia, directly through the foot here, not all the way back to the heel, not forward on the foot, right here. So we're going to say right about there. If that force is coming down through the foot, this is the spot under the person where they should be centering the force of their body, the force of gravity, the force of someone pushing on them. It all comes down to this spot right here. That's where they're centering their body's weight on their foot. And you can see this isn't a spot that's structurally, as far as the bones are concerned, it's not in direct contact with the floor. Now, this is somewhere just a little ahead of the heel, so there is going to be foot contact through here. But as far as like rigid bone structure goes, this is not a spot that's directly in contact with the floor. And we're going to see why that's important a little bit later, as far as weight distribution and why it's important with how you move in Tai Chi, and how it's important when you're doing push hands practice to not have the weight all the way here or all the way forward. Now I'm going to give you a couple of exercises that you can do to work on getting your weight focused here. So what you want to do is stand up, feet flat on the floor, and the first thing that you want to do before you worry about where your weight is shifted is just become aware of how your foot is in contact with the floor. Some people will find that when they're standing, there's a lot of pressure on this part of their foot, and not so much on this side. So this side's a little bit not touching as much. This side has a lot of pressure, and that just means that they're really putting pressure. They're kind of pushing their ankle out to the side rather than keeping it straight above the foot. And so more weight will be distributed out here on the edge. Some people will find that at the back of the foot here, at the heel, there's going to be a lot of more weight than there is at the front. Sometimes their toes aren't even contacting the floor, like they kind of keep the toes pulled up a bit. And so that's something to become aware of. All of this, you just want to become aware of how is your foot contacting the ground. Is the weight distribution over here? Is it back here? Do you carry your weight over the ball of your foot? Are your toes gripping the floor for dear life because your weight shifted forward? Feel how your foot's in contact with the floor. Become aware of that first. And before you move on to trying to shift your weight anywhere in particular, just try to let your foot completely relax into the ground and just kind of melt into the ground and stick to or attach to the ground. So if there's a part of your foot that's lifted up, let it come down and touch the floor. Make sure everything is just fully in contact with the floor all the way through the foot. Let your foot relax and melt into the floor. Once that is done, what I want you to do is shift your weight forward on the foot. So you're going to take your weight wherever it's distributed now, and you're just going to move your weight forward so that it's focused here on the foot. So it's focused on the ball of the foot and on the toes. It's toward the front of the foot. And as you do that, feel how that changes what's going on in your foot. Is there more tension in your foot as you do this? Is there less tension in your foot? Feel what's happening up your leg. Does your calf muscle engage more? Does it engage less? What's happening through all your lower leg, up to your thigh, up to your hips, all the way up to your back. As you shift the weight forward, all the way up to the top of your head, what's changing in your body? And if that's not super apparent, then go ahead and shift the weight back and shift it forward and see what happens when you go from kind of a middle weight distribution on your foot forward to the front part of your foot and the toes. See what happens to the tension in your body, see what happens to your balance. Do you feel more stable? Do you feel less stable? Just pay attention to all of that, and especially pay attention to the tension in your body that it's creating and where it's creating that tension. So now that you've shifted your weight forward, try shifting your weight back. Bring it all the way back, not far enough that you lose your balance backwards and fall. And if you need to hold on to something as you do this just for a little extra stability, that's a great idea. But otherwise, just bring your weight back as far as you can onto the back of the heel here without losing your balance backwards. And feel what that does again to the foot. What part of the foot's tensing? What part's relaxing? What's happening in the ankle? What's happening in the front of the leg? What's happening at the knee? What's happening at the hip? All the way up the body to the top of the head again. Check in with yourself and see what changes when you shift the weight from the front of the foot all the way back as far as you can comfortably. What parts of your body tense? What parts relax? Become aware of all of that. So this is just a practice of listening to how your weight distribution, forward or back on your foot, changes what happens all the way up your body. And this may not be as apparent at first, and so it's a good idea to go back to the heel, then to go forward to the front of the foot, then to come back to the heel, and very slowly shift from one to the other, and just see how that changes the body all the way up. And then come to the middle, relax everything, and try again. Go forward, see what tenses. Come to the middle, relax. Go back, see what tenses. Come back to the middle. And try going back and forth like this quite a bit. Now that you've had some practice shifting forward, shifting back, what I want you to do is to try to imagine that there is a direct line all the way through your leg, through your lower leg, through your shin bone, through the foot, into the floor. And try to get your weight centered over that. Instead of centered over the front of the foot or over the heel, try to bring it in so it's right there. And see what that does to your body. See if there's more tension, less tension, where the tension is, and how it's changed, how it's different from when you're shifted forward versus shifted back. Then ask yourself, are you more relaxed with your weight here? Are you more relaxed with your weight here? Or are you more relaxed with your weight here? Now that you've completed that exercise, go ahead and have a seat again, make yourself comfortable unless you want to keep practicing. Now we're going to talk a little bit about where your weight distribution on your foot affects what's happening all up and down the body. So let's start with the idea that the weight's shifted to the heel. So we're going to put a little blue dot here at his heel, and that's where the weight is shifted. So let's think about his frame here. If it's centered over kind of the middle of the foot, everything's pretty much lined up here. If he shifts it back, what's going to want to happen to his body? It's going to want to do this, right? It's going to want to tip back because he's taking his center of gravity closer and closer to the edge of his base that can support him. And with his feet next to each other, that's basically the length of his feet. So as he gets his weight further and further back to the heel, what starts to happen is the front of his leg here is going to start to tense up. And his toes might even come up and lift up off the floor. All of this is tensing up because it's trying to keep him from going further back this way. He's going to engage the back of his leg like he's squatting down, trying to push himself forward really is what's happening with these muscles engaging back here as he goes further and further back. Additionally, the front of his body is going to start to tense up. As he starts to kind of lean back this way, the front of his body is saying, tense up here to keep this from happening. So this starts to tense, this starts to tense, this starts to tense. And so what happens is all the way up through his body, now he's added tension by going too far back in his stance, by putting his weight too far back on his foot. He's increased the amount of muscle activation that's required to keep him upright and to keep his balance. So this is very disadvantageous in Taiji training, is to do something that creates a lot of extra tension in your body, trying to keep you from falling over. What we're wanting to do is move in a way where our body really supports itself, and we have to use minimum effort for whatever effect it is that we are trying to get out of our training. So which way is he most stable right now? With his weight all the way back, he's probably most stable going forward. So if someone was to come up behind him and give him a shove this way, if we look down at the foot, he has all of